Good evening and welcome. We are a day before Hanukkah, 24 hours before the first candle. And it comes to mind, and we all know the miracle that happened in Chanuka. How there was one jug of oil that was supposed to last for only one day, and Hashem made a miracle that lasted for 8 days. And the question we all wonder to ourselves is, why do we celebrate Chanuka for 8 days? If the jug of oil was already a jug that was supposed to last for one day, the first day wasn't such a miracle. Why then do we celebrate the 8 days of Chanuka as if the miracle was for 8 days? And there's many answers. This is one of the questions we see. There are many, many answers to this question. But let me share with you one answer that is a very, very powerful lesson. Logically, if the Hasmoneim, the Chasmonaim would have looked at that one jug of oil, right after they conquered and ready was able to clean out the temple, clean out the Beit HaMikdash, if they looked at that one jug of oil and realized that in order to produce more oil it would have taken them another 7-8 days to produce more oil, they must have thought to themselves, it's worthless. What's it worth to light one jug of oil that's only going to last for one day? If the rest of the 7 days there's going to be nothing lit. What's it worth lighting that one jug of oil for one day? What's it all worth? You're going to go through 7 days where the menorah, the candelabra will be dark. There'll be no light coming from it. Why should they do it? The miracle was that they still had the faith. They had the courage to continue and light that jug of oil, even though it made no sense logically for them to light it. And because of their faith and their knowledge and their courage in believing in God, that's why Hashem made the miracle and lasted for the rest of the 7 days. So the first day also was a miracle. The fact that they had the courage, they had the faith in order to actually light that jug of oil. And the lesson to every single one of us is that there could be times when we could think of what my one act, what is it worth at all? If we look around the world, we see a world that's dark and full of terrible times. We see a world that has the terrorists that are around the world that are trying to cause harm to many people. We think about what can I do? What does my small act make a difference? My small act of goodness, my small mitzvah make a difference. But the lesson of Chanuka is that even if it's a small mitzvah, it's a small act, it's a small jug, that jug could be the one that lights up the entire world. It could be that jug of oil that actually will continue on light for everything. The way we will truly understand how we will actually be able to light up the entire world and bring the message of Hanukkah, there is no one better to explain that to us than the Rabbi of our Tehillah, the Rav Shlita. And right before I call up the Rav, I would like just to remind everybody that those who haven't yet had a chance to sign up to the wonderful Chanuka Master Chef that will take place Thursday night at the Rabbi Goldman Center, a community event which will also light a menorah together. There are papers on the sides, one on the right and 2 papers on the left, where you can sign up here and your family for this wonderful event. Rabbi Lieberman.
We expect you to stand up. Kvoid Rabbodim, Hadayin, Kiloseinu, Rav Shmal, Kvoid Rav Kalbach, and a very distinguished audience. I sometimes wonder to myself, first of all, I don't have great things to say about Chanuka. This is the standard stuff that everybody knows what Chanuka means. And I just wonder, is there really a need, or some may wonder, is there really a need for reflections on the holiday of Chanuka? The meaning and the significance of this holiday, of this Yom Tov, are so clear and obvious to everyone, to children, to adults. What can reflections or some thoughts add to the real meaning of Hanukkah? We know that reflections for Rosh Hashanah and Kippur are much in order, because these are basically spiritual holidays, and we understand that we have to try to see different dimension than is ordinarily seen in these Yom Tov. But what's the idea of the reflections about Chanuka? We know Chanuka was a very impressive and miraculous victory of a handful of people against the mightiest army of the world at that time, the Greek and Syrian army, and an unbelievable, miraculous military victory, and this is celebrated throughout the ages. And we all know all this. Is there another dimension that we can add to the total holiday as a result of some reflections and some discussions? That's what we would like to try to do tonight. And I think it's important that when we celebrate the Yom Tov, whatever Yom Tov it may be, a minor Yom Tov or a major Yom Tov, that we go beyond the superficial understanding of what that Yom Tov is. A superficial understanding of whatever happens may lead people astray. And as a result of that, they may fail to get and to understand the essence of the Yom Tov. You all remember that when the Jewish people were in the Midbar, the desert, they spoke against the Rabbi against Moshe Lieberman, and the Torah tells us in Parshas Chukas that the Eternal sent poisonous snakes to brought death to the Jewish people. And Moshe Lieberman intervened with Rabbi Shomre to ask for pardon to the Jewish people. And you remember what Rabbi Shomre told them, "Asay lecho sof," take a copper made from copper, a copper snake, and put it up on a high pole. It will be everyone who will look at that snake and will be he will be healed and he will love and he will live. So Rashi remembers asking, is that copper snake has the power to make people die or cause people to live? No, the copper snake was a means, a vehicle. If you lift up the eye to the copper snake, they'll think of the Rabbi Shlomo. They see the heaven, as a result they lift up the eye to see the heaven. And of course, why didn't God tell them directly to see the heaven? He wanted them to know that they should realize and understand and internalize the idea that even a snake, which is the cause of death, chas v'sholom, does not come by itself. Also connected to heaven, is sent by the Rabbi Shlomo. So as a result of looking at the snake and connecting that snake with the Rabbi Shlomo, this will bring life to them, because they'll see that whatever happens in the world is as a result of the intervention of God. Now what's interesting is that many years later, the Gemara tells us that at the time of Chizkiyahu, he took that copper snake, which the Eternal himself has told Moshe Lieberman to make, and he destroyed that snake, and God agreed with him. Why? Because people began to look at the snake as a source by itself. So the purpose of the snake was to connect the Klal Yisrael to the Rabbi Shlomo. And what happened? Because they failed to understand the real purpose of the snake, they looked at it superficially. Instead of that snake accomplishing the purpose and bringing Klal Yisrael closer to the Rabbi Shalom, it alienated them from the Rabbi Shalom, that very snake. Well, how is that possible? Because they failed to comprehend and to become aware of the inner meaning of that snake. They looked at it simply outwardly, superficially. They saw only the external parts. So as a result of that, instead of it being a means to bring closer to the Rabbi Shalom, they became exactly the opposite. And that is true about every holiday, about every mitzvah of the Torah. If we take it only superficially, and we don't try to concentrate on the inner meaning, on the purpose, on the goal, on the objective of that mitzvah instead of bringing us closer to the Rabbi Shalom, may lead us in exactly the other direction. I don't have to tell you that for many people, the holiday of Chanuka turns into making a Chanuka bush, which becomes instead, the Chanuka is the symbol of the fight against assimilation, becomes a means of assimilation. The Chanuka life together, a non-Jewish bush, becomes the means of assimilation. Because those people fail candles, they see only the external part of Hanukkah, we light candles, without beginning to think and to realize what's the purpose of this menorah, so it may lead people astray. Yehuda HaMaccabi, who gave his life in the fight against the Greek-Syrian philosophy and ideology. He gave his life in order to save and to protect the Jewish view upon the world. That name Maccabi became, in other words, against the idea of idolizing the physical body as the goal of our lives. Maccabi has become exactly the opposite now. A symbol for physical, for the idolization of physical sports. Because if once we begin to lose the sight of what is the real purpose of what we ought to do, we have no idea how far this can lead us in a different direction. That's why I think it's important for all of us to stop for a moment and to begin to consider the idea, some inner meaning of the whole holiday of Hanukkah, what it comes to teach us. What's the inner lesson? I don't have to tell you, you know, that the Chanuka, when the Gemara says, my Chanuka, what is Chanuka? Which means, of course, everybody knew what Chanuka was. What's the meaning of the Gemara's question, what is Chanuka? And the answer of the Gemara is very instructive, very interesting. The Gemara mentions, why do we observe Chanuka? Because the Greek Syrians defiled and rendered impure the Beis HaMikdash, and there was no oil, as Karlach just mentioned. They found one jug of oil, one little cruse of oil that retained the seal of the Kohen Gadol, and they had only enough for 1 day, burned for 8 days. That's all that, and because of that miracle, they made the Yom Tov, the Hallel to praise the Rabbi Shalom. And the Gemara ignores completely, which to many people, and to us as well, is a major aspect of Hanukkah, the military, the impressive and unbelievable military victory of Bnei Yisrael over the Greek and Syrian army, which is the real. Of course, it was accompanied by this miracle of the eternal. But why does the Gemara ignore completely, not even give it the respect of a glance, and not mention that all the military victory? All that is mentioned is the fact that there was a miracle of light. Of course, but in fact, the Shemoneh Esrei we mention only the military victory. We don't even mention the miracle of the menorah. And here the Gemara mentions, by Hanukkah, the miracle of light. Why? Because we have to understand what is the inner purpose of Hanukkah. If we don't dwell on the divine intervention with the Jewish people at the time of Hanukkah, we may lose the whole purpose of Hanukkah. And that's why the Gemara says, my Hanukkah, why do we really observe Hanukkah? What is the permanent lesson of Hanukkah? Not just the military victory. Because the military victory made by by itself lead the people in the other direction. You know, may I just digress for a moment. A few days ago, the Lubavitch Hasidim throughout the world celebrated the liberation of the Balatanya from prison. And when he was liberated, he wrote a letter. And that letter, I think, is very instructive and gives us a completely new idea, a new perspective upon the miracle of Hanukkah and upon the whole world in general. In that letter, the Rabbi mentions that the week in which he was liberated was Parshas Vayishlach, and at the beginning of the Parsha, Yaakov Avinu said, "Kotorti mikol achsodi mikol emes." I became small, little, as a result of the kindness that the Rabbi Shalom has shown to me. And there are many interpretations. Why through the kindness did he become small? One explanation is he felt he didn't deserve the kindness of the Rabbi Shalom. But the Balatanya, whose day of liberation we celebrated, gives a very original and very deep explanation for the word Ketontim Karasodim. He says like this: if you take an ordinary person, or you take Esau or Yishmael, and you give him power, you give him riches, the Eternal shows kindness to him. The more he receives, the more he becomes proud of himself, the more he swells up, the more he grows. Look what I possess, look my power, look who I am. Yaakov, he says, the more the Rabbi Shalom gives, he feels the presence of the Rabbi Shalom. He does not look only at the gift itself. When he looks at the gift, he sees immediately the origin of the gift. When the Rabbi Shalom gives him something, he said, eat a piece of bread. We don't look at the piece of bread. We say, Amoitzi lechem noratz, the Eternal gives us the piece of bread. The more the Rabbi Shalom gives, the more we become aware of his presence, the more we are closer to him. So if we feel the presence of the Rabbi Shalom, it's only obvious and natural that we become very small now ourselves in presence of the Eternal. Katonti mikol achsodim, because more the Rabbi Shalom gives me, the more I feel his presence and the more I am aware of my nothingness compared to the Rabbi Shalom. Why do I mention this? The same amount of riches that the person receives, the same chesed, for one person it becomes a mean of excessive pride and self-aggrandizement, look what I have. And for the other person, the same possessions become a cause, become a reason for feeling his nothingness compared to the Rabbi Shalom. It all depends on the perspective, how we look upon it. That's why it's very important, very necessary, how we look at the Yom Tov of Chanukah, how it speaks to us, and how it really influences our soul. We have heard before, Rav Karbach asked a question, the well-known question that everybody talks about. There was enough oil for one day, and the miracle was it burned miraculously only for 7 days. And logically, we should observe only 7 days of holiday, because one day is natural. There was no miracle involved in it. Rav Karbach gave a very interesting answer. But there's many other answers now. I will not mention all of them, I just want to dwell on one of them. One of them is that the very fact that the Greek Syrian armies walked into the Beis Hamikdash, they defiled the temple, they contaminated all the oils that were there, everything lost their value. And if there was not, by miracle, was not left one cruse of oil with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, that because of the eternal intervention of God, they didn't notice it, they didn't see it, they became aware of it, there would have been no possibility for a miracle. Because they needed something that the miracle could be dwelled upon, it could be developed. So what saved the Jewish people, the fact that one, in spite of the total corruption, of the total contamination of all the oils that were there, one little cruse of oil was left pure and unaffected, intact, not defiled. That in itself is a miracle. And because of that we have 8 days. The first day is the miracle that the cruse of oil was found, in spite of the overwhelming forces that entered the Beis HaMikdash to defile everything. And because of that we were able to have the miracle of Chanuka. The deeper meaning of that is that even when we see, unfortunately, a large part of the Jewish people has become affected by the spirit of the world. But as long as there is even a relatively small group that retain the seal of the Kohen Gadol, who remain pure, who remain unaffected by the general corruption of the world, who retain their loyalty to the Rabbi Shalom, from that a miracle can come and a new light can emerge and envelop the whole Jewish people. And one cruse of oil, one group of people who are not dragged along by the destructive tides of the world, they remain intact, they have upon themselves the pure seal of the Kohen Gadol, and nothing touches them. As a result of that, the miracle can occur, and the whole Jewish people can be saved. If we go a step further, we're not talking about the Jewish people as a whole. Every Jewish person, regardless how much of his personality has become contaminated and defiled, there's still, according to the view of Kabbalists, a little cruse of oil in him, very dormant. Sometimes it's not noticeable, it's hidden, nobody realizes it, but it is there. And sometimes, and we have seen it happening, sometimes it's awakened, we don't know the reason, and a total transformation takes place. We see it quite often today in today's world. In Jewish people as a whole, there's that cruse of oil which is not affected. And in every individual Jewish man and woman, there's that cruse of oil that, in spite of the influence of the world in general that contaminates a great part of our personality, something is left. And if we know how to awaken it, it's possible that the miracle occurs and begins to shine and illuminate and radiate with a new light. That is therefore we have the 80 days of miracle. I would like to dwell for a few moments on the idea that the miracle happens with the Shomre, with oil. The miracle happens with oil. What is really the symbolic value of oil? That the oil, even defiled oil, can also give out light. As far as the light is concerned, you look at the light, you don't know the source of the light, whether the oil has been totally and impure or remained pure. It seems outwardly at least not to affect the light. Yet, if the oil becomes impure or contaminated, we may not use it. I would like to dwell a little bit upon this idea that the miracle happens with oil, that oil has to remain pure. Why? Because there is a midrash in the Mishlei. There's an interesting midrash. The midrash begins with the question, "Ha'chochma ma'ayin temotzei?" Where is the source, the origin of wisdom? That's a pasuk in Shlomo Melech said. It's a chochma ma'ayin temotzei in Hadas. The midrash says in the question, where is the source of wisdom? Where is its origin? So if I remember correctly, Rabbi Yeshua says it's Veroish. Wisdom, intelligence, originates in the head, in the brain, in the mind of the individual. And they bring certain psukim to support this position. Rabbi Lezer says that the origin of the wisdom and intelligence is believed in the heart. And the conclusion of that medrash is that Rabbi Lezer is right. Wisdom, the source of wisdom is in the heart, chacham lev. It comes from the heart and not from the brain. It seems to run counter our own experience. It's contradicted by what we feel. We all know that when we think, we want to be intelligent, we use the brain. The heart is perhaps the seat of feeling, of sentiment, But the mind is used for, the brain is used for intelligence, to understand something. If has to show the brain is affected, then we lose our intelligence. And why does the conclusion of the Medrash where is the origin from wisdom and intelligence? Exactly related to the heart. How do we understand this? But a little reflection will give us a deeper insight in that Medrash. Imagine two bright young students enrolled in university. One of them becomes an engineer, and this is his occupation, and the other one becomes a medical physician, a medical doctor. Now both of these occupations are challenging to the brain, that's not easy. They're both lucrative positions. There's no reason rationally why one should choose one position, one occupation, and another one should choose another one. You have no rational explanation. What's the cause? Why does one decide, no, I want to be a doctor, and the other one says, I want to be an engineer, and the third one says, I want to be a scientist? Why? Not because of a rational consideration, it's much better for me. There's just an interior belief, a tendency of the heart. The heart guides. I have more of a feeling for that kind of occupation. There's no rational calculation that this is better, this brings in more money, this will give you more prestige. It's just following his own desire, his own inner reason. Which means we use our brain, but what guides our brain, how to use it and where to use it and how to concentrate, this is belief. This precedes the brain. This is the inner orientation of the individual. This causes, directs in what direction the brain should go. We know in Israel, and I don't want to go into politics, I use this just as an example. In Eretz Yisrael, there are rightists and leftists. The leftists feel that the gentleman is and it's not an exact analysis of the situation, very superficial. But the leftists feel that in order to bring about peace, you have to give in to the Arabs as much as possible. Because if you don't, then you enrage them and they become dangerous, and in order you have to pacify them in order to give in more and more. The rightists feel that the more you give them, the more dangerous it is, the more they will demand, and the only way you can really make sure to have peace is to stand firm on your principles and not to yield an inch. Now I assume that in both cases, in both fields, in both camps rather, there are some intelligent people. I hope so, I guess so. Sometimes we wonder, but sometimes I guess that in both cases there are some intelligent people. They both have access to the same facts, to the same information, yet they draw opposite conclusions. One draws conclusion from the facts, give in and give in, give in, that's the only way to survive. And the other one says, stand firm, that's the only way to survive. What causes these different opinions, the opposite opinions? Just an interior belief. One cares more about what the world will say, one cares perhaps more about the future of the Jewish people. It is just an interior belief that deforms and guides and influences our so-called rational conclusions. Because the basic material is belief. You all remember the story of the Gemara, I already mentioned this once, and during the time of the Tanoim was one of the most important scholars in Torah was Elisha ben Avuya, very great man in Latin learning, yet became a heretic, became an Apocryphus, caused a lot of trouble to the Jewish people. The only one of all the Tanoim. Why? There are many reasons, I don't want to go into them. But one reason is given Yerushalmi, that the original motivation why he went to learn Torah was not because he wanted to connect to the Israel through the Torah, was self-aggrandizement. And this original motivation, this life which was defiled, had a negative influence on all the Torah that he learned and did not have any effect upon him, to the contrary. Because of his original orientation was defiled and contaminated, the whole Torah that he learned afterwards had a negative effect upon him. So now we understand what is meant that the origin of wisdom and intelligence is the leif. Because the leif is the basis. Of course you use your mind as a tool, but what guides you is the inner inclination where we want to go. And that is represented by Shemen. Shemen is the oil. The oil is the basis for the light that comes afterwards. This precedes the light. And if that Shemen is defiled, even the inner motivation, there's something which is not pure, which is not honest, which is not sincere, the light that develops as a result of that is also defiled and also impure. Because according to many commentaries, the Greeks were not that much opposed to the study of Torah, to the performing of mitzvahs, but what bothered them is the recognition that the Torah comes from the eternal lashkicham, to make them forget Torah Techa, that the Torah is something divine, elevates the people, that the purpose of our existence is not this world, it was this fullness. In other words, the confrontation between the Jewish people and the Greek and Syrians was not military, was basically ideological and philosophical. Because had the Jewish people accepted the Greek philosophy, there would have been no danger to their physical existence, and that's what the basic so unique about Hanukkah. The basic confrontation was philosophical. That's why we see, to our shame, that there were many Jews who gave in to the enemy, made peace with the enemy, were ready to, you know, with the story that there were many Hellenists. Among the Jewish people themselves, there were many Hellenists that went along with the Greek and Syrians. In fact, you know, Matisyahu was the Kohen Gadol. The task of the Kohen Gadol basically was to be the Beis Hamikdash in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. That was his job. But there are times when Klal Yisrael is in danger. He was the origin of the revolt of the Hashmonaim. He started. And his first act was not to kill a Greek soldier or to kill a Syrian soldier. His first act was to kill the Jew that betrayed his people, that went to offer a sacrifice to the Olympians, to the Greek idol, and just betrayed the Jewish people, and he killed them, and as a result of that, this was the original spark that ignited the whole revolt against the Syrian and Greek army. Because why? Because it was not the confrontation that we have to remember. The confrontation of Hanukkah was basically ideological and spiritual and not physical. Of course, it developed into physical danger afterwards, but that was the basic confrontation. So we should never forget what's the purpose of Hanukkah. And if we remember what the purpose of Hanukkah is, that it was basically ideological confrontation, then the danger of Hanukkah leading us in the opposite direction, as sometimes happens, unfortunately, in our time, that will not exist, because we don't forget the original purpose and goal, and then what we try to accomplish in the Yom Tov of Hanukkah. So this is the idea of the Shemen. If the Shemen should remain pure. The Shemen remains pure, then the light that emanates from the Shemen that comes afterwards remains also pure. Of course, intelligence and wisdom is compared to light, because it's supposed to illuminate our ways in the darkness of the world. But what kind of light? Artificial light that will lead us astray, or light that will lead us in the right direction? That depends on what Shemen we use. Shemen is the basic orientation, which is the cause, the basis of our light that comes afterwards. What's interesting also to know, to recognize, I just said, let me just give you another example. As we mentioned before, that the whole difference between the one who knows how to get to obtain the proper lesson from Hanukkah and not is only a question of perspective. Whether he knows what to concentrate on and whether he knows what to ignore or what not to concentrate on. We all know, I think I may have heard it already, the story, and it's worth repeating it because it's interesting and it's instructive, of Yaakov Ish Tzereida. Yaakov Ish Tzereida was one of the Hellenists, and the Greek who ruled at that time, the ruled over Israel, appointed this Hellenist, this assimilationist, as the Kohen Gadol, as the high priest of Eretz Yisrael. And he and his uncle was Yosef ben Yezer, who is mentioned in Pirkei Avos, on the Av Bezin of Klal Yisrael. And the Medrash tells us that he led his uncle to the gallows on Shabbos, to be killed on Shabbos. He was Yaakov Ish Tzereida, he led his uncle to be killed on Shabbos. On the way, when he led him to the gallows, he taunted his uncle. And he told him, you see, what kind of horse I'm riding on, because he was riding on a very beautiful white horse. And Yaakov Ish Tzereida, what kind of horse you're going to ride on when you'll be hanging on the gallows? Not only he led him to be killed, he only wanted to hurt him and taunt him and make fun of him. So Yosef ben Yezer answered him, if a person who transgresses the will of the Rabbi Shalom has that kind of glory and honor that you have, imagine what kind of glory awaits the people who are ready to fulfill the will of the You can imagine what kind of compensation and glory will have those people who fulfill the will of the Rabbi Shalom. So this Yaakov Ish Tzereida was taken aback and asked him, is there anyone who is more ready to fulfill the will of God? You see what kind of end you're having. So he continued, Yosef ben Yezer says, if even those who fulfill the will of Hashem, look what kind of bitter end what awaits them. Imagine what awaits those who transgress the will of the Eternal. That's the end of the discussion. The Medrash says, the words of this Tana of his uncle entered to penetrate in him like a poison. It worked in him. He found no rest until he brought upon himself all kinds of punishment, and at the end he committed suicide. And Yosef ben Yezer said, you are writing Gan Eden before me. That's the story of the Medrash. The question that we ask in this Medrash is, what made such a drastic transformation in this evil man, Yaakov Ish Tzereida? Nothing had changed. He was still the boss. Yosef ben Yezer was being led to be killed and to be hanged. Nothing has changed in the outward world. The same world was before. Yet there was some kind of drastic transformation in him. Well, what happened? What happened? Just heard a few words from Moshe ben Yezer. What was so powerful in these words that they caused such an inner, deep, complete transformation in his personality that from a Moshe he became a tzaddik in a day or so? What happened? So I thought that this Yaakov Ish Tzereida, whom the Greeks appointed as a Kohen Gadol, was not just an ordinary murderer. He was a man of ideology. We just said before that one whose inner motivation is defiled, and his thinking is also crooked, is also deformed and distorted. So he felt that he represented the future. We know in Russia there were also young communists who thought that they present the future, and they took their own parents. They denounced their own parents because they felt the future was with them. So he felt that he was fighting for a better future for Klal Yisrael modernism. And if there are some old reactionary rabbis, however respectable they may be, if they stand in the way, they have to be eliminated. He was convinced ideologically that he was right, he does something important. And suddenly he saw that this man heard the same facts, and he looked at it totally differently. There's another motivation, there's other oil. There's another way of looking at the events that took place. That nothing shook this Yosef Eliezer, his uncle, his venerable uncle. That even the same facts that he was so sure he saw now the future for him, shook what's happening to you. And the same facts strengthened the faith and the emunah of Yosef Eliezer. So he saw that there are other ways of looking at the world. That depends what you dwell on. It depends how your oil is. Depends what your original motivation is. Once he saw this, he realized that for nothing I plundered, for nothing I killed, for nothing I destroyed, because there's another way of looking at the world. No wonder he could find no rest in himself, because he felt that he was totally in a different world. So that's why we say the shemen is important. If the shemen is defiled, if there's no cruse of oil that remains intact, that whatever results may be defiled. So that's why it's so important that we pay the shemen. If the shemen is midikar God, a miracle can happen. And that's why the Gemara says, my Chanuka, what's the real meaning of Chanuka? What are the permanent value of Chanuka that even after the Chashmonaim ceased to exist, and even after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, what remained? Remained is the light that the Kikenu, the Menorah, that the miraculous, he stays forever, for all years to come. So that's another important lesson of Chanuka. I would like to conclude, if I may, with one other thought. If you bear with me for another few moments. You know that by Chanuka, we see a very interesting thing. The Gemara says that the basic mitzvah of Chanuka is only one candle. Mitzvah Nei Chanuka Ishu Beisel. Only one candle would be enough to fulfill the mitzvah of Chanuka. You have to do, we see, it said Mahadrin, those who want to make an extra effort and beautify the mitzvah, enhance the value of the mitzvah, make it beautiful, make it shine, they like every day more and more, like the Mesilah, until at the end there's a lot of lights. Now there is a Gemara that every mitzvah, there's a mitzvah to do the basic mitzvah, and in order to do more than the basic mitzvah, to beautify it, it's called the Hidur mitzvah, embellish the mitzvah, enhance the beauty of the mitzvah, is ad shlish. You add a third of the price of the mitzvah. The mitzvah esrik costs $100. To get a more beautiful esrik, you should add another $30, ad shlish. Not obligated to spend more on the beauty of a mitzvah than a third of the value of the mitzvah. Here by Chanuka we see something else completely. That to the Hidur mitzvah, the addition, what we add to the basic mitzvah is many times more than the mitzvah itself. At the end of Chanuka we have 36 lights, and we should have only 8 lights. Now that many times more. Why is Chanuka different? What's Chanuka, the mitzvah Chanuka different from all other mitzvahs? What's the basic reason? Now there is the Gemara in the Midrash Rabbah Parshas Bereshis. So the Torah says, there was darkness upon the deep at the creation of the world. So the Midrash says that this darkness refers to the Malchus Yavam, the kingdom of Greek and Assyrian, that by their laws and by their approaches darkened the eyes of Israel, darkened their eyes. What did they do? So the Medrash, they told to the Jewish people, Kisvu lachem al keren hashor. Write for yourself on the horn of an ox. That's the Lashon Medrash. שאין לכם חלק באלוקי ישראל, that you have no share in the God of Israel. Where should you write it? Where should you engrave this? On the horn of an ox. That's the message. The Choshech is darkness. The Greeks darkened the eyes of the Jewish people, the Shichu and them shall Israel, and told them, Kisru lachem, write, she'al keren hashoyer, on the horn of an ox, ein lechem chelik b'elokei Yisrael. That's the message. Now, of course, to take this message literally, difficult to understand. Why do they have to write on the horn of an ox? I mean, now, of course, they forced them to deny the Rabbi and to engage in all kinds of activities that are against the laws of the Torah. And all kind of unsound and unhealthy activities. But why write? What is the symbolism of having them write on the horn of an ox? So one explanation is as follows, and I would like to repeat this. An ox in olden times represented Rav Tvuos B'Koyach Shor. An ox was the means by which you could become rich, because the ox labored the ground, labored the field, and as a result of that you had a good harvest, and you became rich. The symbol of material success. Today there are other symbols of material success, but then it was the ox. Because ox represented agricultural riches. You could live in the ground and ox. Now, riches by itself, we ask in the Rosh Chodesh bench, we ask Chaim Shaloi Shalokavod. We ask the Rabbi of riches. We don't want to be poor. We want riches, we want to have money, we want to be able to have all the means that are necessary to fulfill the will of God in this world, to help other people, to help ourselves, to help our children, to help Torah. We ask for riches. What's the problem with riches? The problem for riches is if it becomes, the ox itself is not dangerous. What's dangerous? The horn. Which means when it becomes hardened, becomes like a carrot. The ox itself is beneficial. It's needed for our existence. But the horn is dangerous. When it becomes hardened, and this becomes our main purpose in life. And not only that, Karen has another translation. She says, Kikaran er ponav. His face begins to shine, to glow. It glows in the eyes. Kikaran. So what's the problem? When does the ox become dangerous? When it has a Karen. When it receives a glitter. When it shines in your eyes. When it blinds you. It is blandished in front of your eyes and you see nothing else. And we know some people, the rest of us said, some people, they hold the penny of the earth in front of the eyes, you see only the penny, you see nothing else. When the material wealth becomes a Karen, it can both ways. It becomes hard, inflexible. And not only that, it begins to shine. It glows in your eyes and really blinds you to the point that you see nothing else. This becomes your whole goal in life. And I don't have to tell you to what degree the search, the chase after money can blind people when they see nothing else. I have seen great swarm where they speak about people who are great people, and once they begin to feel the love of money, they lose all the high spiritual levels that they possess, because this can become an idle search for money. Keren HaShoyer. If the Keren, the Shoyer becomes a Keren, begins to shine and they glitter in your eyes, and becomes your basic goal and you see nothing else, it darkens the eyes of the Jews. Why it darkens the eyes? Because you see only one thing and you see nothing else. And this causes She'enem Chelik B'Elokei Yisrael, because once this takes possession of the eyes and of your mind, who thinks about the Rabbi? Who thinks about anything else? So how do we counteract this? How do we counteract this? Now we know, I think I already told you once the story. I would like to repeat it again. There was in Eretz Yisrael, I think some of you have heard it, but I think it's very instructive and I'd like to repeat it. There was a young boy of about 14 and 15 years who sat in the yeshiva, learned quite well, And they learned together a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, where it says, "What's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Zakras Yisrael, the Rabbi Shlomo wanted to favor the Jewish people. That's why he increased them and he gave them many laws, Torah mitzvahs. What's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Zakras Yisrael, that's why he gave them so much Torah, so much mitzvahs, the Zakras Yisrael." So he learned this, and the student innocently asked the Rabbi, because he loves the Jewish people, he burdened us with so many mitzvahs. It doesn't make sense. If he really loves the Jewish people, he should have lightened their burden. He should not have put such a heavy burden of Torah mitzvahs on every step where we go. He should have lightened the burden. And the Rabbi heard this question, became enraged, said, "That's of course a heretic question, of course the question, we don't ask such question." Now this rejection of the Rabbi had a very bad effect upon the student, and he lost his desire for learning. He must say, man, Rabbi has to be very careful. With every word that he says, he can either elevate the spirits of a young boy, he can also destroy him. And he said that by the fact that he did not take his question seriously, the contrary, he gave him a sense of rejection, that this really removed his whole desire for learning. And she came home, and the father saw that the boy doesn't learn, he didn't know what to do. So he went to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and they told him the problem that he has. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach bring him to me. He brought him to Rav Shlomo Auerbach and explained him what this meant, because he eternally loves the Jewish people. That's why he added what does it mean? It says because everybody eats, the whole world eats, the whole world, everybody's a game. But for the whole world eating, it's just a mundane affair. Eating is nothing. During the Abishah loved the Jewish people who made eating a mitzvah. You say a bracha, the things that you're allowed to eat, that you're not allowed to eat. He elevated the ordinary, vulgar, mundane activity of eating. He elevated and made it the mitzvah. You do the same thing as they do. But to you, it's a mitzvah, it's something of value, something precious, something elevating. Everybody lives in a house, ordinary house. But to you, living in a house is having a mezuzah in the house, elevates the whole house, something else differently. Everybody wears clothes. You wear tzitzis, you don't wear shatnez. In other words, here with Torah mitzvahs means you do the same activities that others do. But for others, it's just ordinary activities that has really no transcending spiritual value. For the Jewish people, the same activity becomes something important. This changed the view of the boy. He saw what we do here with Torah mitzvahs. So that's how the view of a person can change his whole approach. The whole approach to life of Torah mitzvahs. That's why reflections are necessary. Because reflections makes us look at everything from the point of view of its deeper inner meaning than we look at otherwise. We know by Chanuka, Chanuka has the mitzvah of 8 lights. And many Svarim mention the very symbolic value of the number 8. 7 is related to the world, even though Shabbos is the 7th day, but the Shivas Yemei Bereshis, that's related to the world. The 8th day, according to Chazal, represents those, how should I say, those powers that are beyond the world, higher than nature, above nature. That's why Bris Milah is on the 8th day. Normally, the person is created, does not need Bris Milah. Bris Milah means you go beyond nature. This is the 8th day you go above nature, you attach yourself to the Rabbi Shalom. The Gemara says that the Lost Lovey that play a harp with 8 strings, because the number 8 represents above the Shivas Yemei Bereshis, above what's in the natural, above the Deva. And that's why Chanuka is at the 8th day. 8 many places. After 7 weeks of counting, we receive the Torah after the 7 weeks. Because the 8 represents those powers, those forces that are above the nature. This is what the Chanuka represents. Because in the Beis Hamikdash, there was a menorah of 7. It's shown in the Beis HaMikdash, filled the Beis HaMikdash with Kedusha. Chanukah teaches us that Chanukah prepared ourselves for the time of exile. That even when there's no Beis HaMikdash, beyond the Beis HaMikdash, our Pesach Beisor shine on the street. Even in darkness, you make the Sumanissa, there you can also bring the influence and the power of the light of Torah. So this is the purpose of Chanukah. 8, beyond the 7. And that's why we mentioned a few days ago, the Gemara says, and with this we will finish for tonight, because there's a Shas, the Gemara says that it's a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Ma Yofis Uma Noamt Ava B'Talugim. How beautiful are you, and how pleasant are you, Ava with love, B'Talugim and delight. Pasuk in Shir Hashirim. Ma Yofis, how beautiful, Ma Noim, how pleasant, Ava B'Talugim. The Gemara says in Masechet Sofrim, I think, Ma Yofis, how beautiful are you with mezuzah. Ma Noam, how pleasant are you with Chanukah. That's the Gemara says. Because we know the Gemara, when we like the Chanukah, the mezuzah is to be on the right side of the door, as you when you walk in, and Chanukah you have to light on the left side of the door. And those times when you lit the Al Pesach Beisor towards the street, you have to light them in there. This was on the left side of the door. So Ma Yofis, how beautiful are you with mezuzah? Ma Noam, how pleasant are you with the Chanukah? Why? Why is mezuzah on the right side, Chanukah on the left? Why mezuzah you call Yofis beautiful? And why Chanukah you call pleasant? Because what is mezuzah? We just mentioned this. Mezuzah means you elevate your whole home towards the Rebbein Shalom. You give it to the Eternal. It belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You put Shema Yisrael Shemakein Hashem Echad on every door, always lifted up, which means your house is protected. You don't allow the influence of the street to penetrate and contaminate your home. That's the mezuzah. Mezuzah protection. You're perfect where it ought to be. Chanukah goes beyond that. Not only is your home the way it ought to be, but it is a Pesach Beisor B'chutz. A delight and warmth should emanate from your home in order to influence others, in order to bring light to the street of Pesach, which is Rabbi. That's what Chanukah represents. 8 light, more than the temple, goes out to the whole world. Chanukah is the preparation for Lo'os and Loveh. That's what Chanukah is. So that's what the Gemara says. Ma Yofis, when you have a mezuzah, your home is perfect the way it ought to be. It's excellent, it's beautiful, beautiful to behold. But it can be beautiful, nobody gains anything from it. You save your own life, it's beautiful. When it's pleasant means that something flows from your home to others and they enjoy it. Ma'anam, it's angenehm, it's pleasant for others. And that's what Chanukah represents, that you come light from the house, it spreads around all the whole world all over. That's the idea of Chanukah. That the more fill the whole world with light to prepare for Mashiach Tzidkenu. So that's what the message says. Ma Yofis, how beautiful are you with mezuzah? Of course, beautiful. But the world does not obtain from what it ought to obtain until Ma Noam. That pleasantness comes out from your house in order to reach others. And that's represented by Chanukah. Ava, when you behave where mezuzah, the Rebbein Shalom loves it. But Talugim, the light, is when not only your home is made out to be, but something comes out, flows out from your home in order to influence others. So let's hope that all of us will internalize these important messages of Chanukah. And as a result of that, the permanent light of Chanukah will shine in our own lives, in the life of Klal Yisrael, and prepare the whole world for Bias Mashiach Tzidkenu v'meher v'yameinu. Amen.